So we spent the last several videos discussing price elasticity of demand, which measures the responsiveness of quantity demanded to a change in price. So we said that one of the advantages of including elasticity in our conversation is that we can go a step further from just the law of demand that says when price goes up, quantity demanded goes down, and vice versa. We can go a step further and we can talk about how much that quantity changes, not just the direction of the change, but the magnitude of the change when we see a price change. There are other things, as we have discussed in previous chapters, that cause a change in demand. So we know that a price change will cause a change in quantity demanded. It will just move us along an existing demand curve. But there are other changes that can occur that will shift our entire demand curve. And so we can talk about elasticity in terms of those things as well. So for example here, income elasticity. We know that a change in income will shift the demand curve. We know that if you get paid more, you get a raise at work, it's going to change how you view your willingness, your ability to pay for certain products, right? Elasticity then can take us one step further and can help us answer the question, by how much, right? So income elasticity of demand, as opposed to price elasticity of demand, where we were talking about the effect on quantity demand of a change in price. Now if we're talking about the effect on demand of a change in income, it's called income elasticity of demand. And it measures how a change in income affects spending. So remember that with price elasticity of demand, we know that the elasticity will always be negative because it's calculated as percent change in quantity divided by percent change in price. And we know that if quantity goes up, price goes down. If quantity goes down, price goes up, which means that the top and bottom of that fraction always are going to have opposite signs. One will be positive, one will be negative, so the elasticity will always be negative. That's because of the law of demand. That's not the case when we're talking about income and the relationship between income and demand, because we know that it depends on the type of good that we're talking about, what the relationship is between income and demand. So the elasticity, the income elasticity, E with the subscript I, can be either positive or negative. For a normal good, it will be positive. So normal goods, remember, are things like steak dinners, that when you get a raise, you'll consume more of it. If you, say, lose your job or lose some income, you'll consume less of it. So, in other words, your quantity demanded and your income move in the same direction for a normal good. So either both will be positive, both are increasing, or both will be negative, both are decreasing. Either way, the resulting fraction is going to be positive, right? So for a normal good, the elasticity, income elasticity is always positive. It's greater than 0. Now, whether it's more elastic or inelastic, again, depends on what type of normal good we're talking about. For necessities, we'll see an elasticity that is positive, but that's less than 1, meaning it's inelastic in demand. So a necessity is something like maybe gasoline or medical care, maybe your pharmaceuticals, things that you need to stay healthy. These are things where if the price, if your income changes, how much of this item, good or service you consume doesn't change very much because it's a necessity. You've got to have it. Whether you lose your job or get a raise, you have to have the same amount of, or close to the same amount of the product. And so you have pretty inelastic demand for these types of goods in terms of the relationship between your income and how much you consume. which means your elasticity, your income elasticity, though it's greater than 0 because it is a normal good, it's going to be less than 1 because you have inelastic demand. Luxuries, on the other hand, diamond rings, for example, are things where you have much more elastic demand. So the elasticity, the income elasticity is going to be greater than 1 in that case, because these are things where if you get a raise at work, it may make a big difference in whether you want this product, whether you run out and buy it or not, because it's a luxury good. If you lose some income, it's going to change drastically how much of these luxuries that you consume, right? So your demand is highly responsive to a change in your income for a luxury. Now, so for normal goods, whether it's a necessity or a luxury, we're going to have a positive income elasticity, because for both of these types of goods, necessities and luxuries, even though for necessities your demand may not change much when your income changes, if it does change, it will change in the same direction as your income. It will go up. Your demand will go up when your income goes up, and demand will go down when your income goes down. The other type of good is an inferior good. So remember, our example of an inferior good was something like ramen noodles, where you get a raise at work, you consume fewer ramen noodles. You lose your job, you're a student, you do something where you have less income, you're going to consume more of something like ramen noodles or of store brand items, right? So inferior goods will see an income elasticity that's less than 0, because we'll see your demand moving in an opposite direction of your income. So other than that sort of explanation of what's going on with this elasticity, the fact that it's the relationship between your income and demand as opposed to price and quantity demanded with price elasticity, everything else about this type of elasticity is very similar to what we've already discussed. So specifically, how you calculate income elasticity is exactly the same equation that we used in calculating price elasticity of demand. The only change is that on the bottom we have a % change in income instead of a % change in price. But you'll still use the midpoint method. You'll still use the same formulas that you're used to using with price elasticity of demand. You'll just replace price with income in this case. And then you'll still use those same rules about if elasticity is greater than 1, or the absolute value, I should say, is greater than 1, then it means we have very elastic demand. If that absolute value of the elasticity is less than 1, it means we have inelastic demand. All of that still applies when we're talking about income elasticity. So here's a little practice for you. Suppose Doug receives a pay increase at work. His income increases by 20%. As a result, he decides to buy 12% less ground beef. What does that mean for Doug? What is ground beef to Doug? Pause the video, think about your answer. So ground beef for Doug is an inferior good. How do we know? Because his income increased and his demand for ground beef decreased. This is the definition of an inferior good. It's something that you consume less of when you have higher income. Now, one more type of demand elasticity, cross-price elasticity. So remember, we're thinking about different things that cause your demand to change, and then elasticity gives us a look at how much demand changes, right? So we know that price changes your quantity demanded, and we measured how much by looking at price elasticity of demand. We know that income causes your demand to shift, and we looked at how much by looking at income elasticity of demand. Now, we also know that the price of a related good can change, which will affect your demand of the present good, right? And that how much question is answered using what's called cross-price elasticity. So changes in the prices of complements and substitutes affect demand. Right? So we've thought about this with the example of peanut butter and jelly. When the price of peanut butter goes up, we'll see that our quantity demanded for peanut butter goes down, and as we buy less peanut butter, we also will demand less jelly because these are complementary goods, right? So demand for jelly will shift to the left when the price of peanut butter goes up. This is a change in the price of a complement that affects demand. Substitutes as well. So the example shown on this slide, different sodas. So if a price of one soda goes up, then you'll switch your behavior because there are substitutes. There are other sodas that you can buy, so you'll demand more of other sodas. So cross-price elasticity of demand measures the percent change in quantity demanded of one good to the percent change in price of a related good. So we know that when the price of a related good changes, it will tend to change our demand for a good, right? Cross-price elasticity of demand helps us answer how much. We measure this exactly the same way that we've measured other demands, elasticity of demands. So it's just the percent change in quantity demanded of one good divided by the percent change in price of the related good. So it's exactly the same. You'll use the midpoint method. You'll use exactly the same formula you've used before to calculate the cross-price elasticity. The only thing that will be different now is you'll have quantities of one good, like jelly, divided by prices of a different good, like peanut butter. Right? So that's where the A and the B come from in this equation. It's the quantity of good A, percent change in quantity of good A divided by percent change in price of good B. So this also can be negative or positive depending on the relationship between the two goods. So for substitutes, think about whether the cross-price elasticity of substitutes is going to be positive or negative. Walk yourself through the story here, right? So you've got substitutes. What's an example of substitutes? Coke and Pepsi, right? Two related goods that are substitutes for one another. So the price of Pepsi goes up, right? So we've got a positive sign on the bottom here. If the price of Pepsi goes up, what happens to your demand, quantity demanded for Coke? It goes up, right? You'll switch from buying Pepsi to buying Coke because Pepsi is more expensive. So when the price of good B goes up, the quantity demanded of good A also goes up. We have a positive sign on the bottom, positive sign on top. This means we have a positive overall elasticity, cross-price elasticity. For substitutes, we'll have positive cross-price elasticity. For complements, on the other hand, so peanut butter and jelly, if the price of peanut butter goes up, so you have a positive sign on the bottom here, what happens to your demand for jelly? You're going to consume less jelly now that the price of peanut butter is higher, right? Because you'll consume less peanut butter, consequently you need less jelly, right? So positive sign on the bottom, but a negative sign on the top, less jelly. So for complementary goods, the cross-price elasticity is less than 0. It's negative. Other than that, we still have the same rules about determining whether it's relatively elastic or inelastic, and that has to do with the absolute value of the elasticity. Is it greater than 1 or is it less than 1? Here's a little practice for you on this. Economists have studied that when the price of chicken increases, people purchase less rice. With these two goods, which of the following is true? Pause your video and think about your answer. So the answer is A. When the price of chicken increases, people purchase less rice. This means that the elasticity, the cross-price elasticity, has to be negative. You'll see price, the bottom of the fraction, going up, and quantity demanded, the top of the fraction, going down. If they go in opposite directions, then you have a negative elasticity. right? So we know it has to be negative. What does that mean about the relationship between chicken and rice? They must be complements, right? So because the price of chicken went up, you can buy less chicken, which means you also get less rice. So obviously you must have been consuming chicken and rice together. So hopefully you watched my previous videos on price elasticity of demand, where we really went through sort of the nitty-gritties of what elasticity is all about and how to calculate it, because those are the skills, the rules, the equations that you'll continue to use in these new types of elasticity. It's just a slight change to those equations, and otherwise you can calculate them exactly the same way. The real new piece here in this video is the story, the explanation of what it is we're measuring when we're talking about income elasticities and then cross-price elasticities.